Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Look at me flying. This is a Ukraine war, I guess, update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I have done all my videos today, and there was a bit that I took out of my geopolitics video that I wanted to share with you. It is an aside on American politics. It is tangentially to do with the Ukraine war, but that's thrown in here. I'm going to start with, I think, a really important thread by Pekka Kallioniemi again, one of his Vatnik soup threads. And he did a similar one that I talked you through recently. He had done one some time ago on disinformation. This is along the same sort of lines. This is a topic, as you well know, that really floats my boat, or indeed gets my goat, one of those two. Disinformation really enrages me. So we'll start there. Then we're going to pop on to another thread to do with Titushki and Georgia, one that I meant to do when I last looked at Georgia in detail, but I forgot, basically. So anyway, let's start here. So I'll discuss a specific propaganda disinformation, says Pekka Kallioniemi, disinformation subject that the Kremlin likes to use: anti-Semitism. I also talk about how the Russian society itself has become riddled with anti-Semitism and how this has led to a decrease in Jewish population in the country. So Russian anti-Semitism works on many levels, he says. Their narratives vary depending whether they're targeting a local audience or people in Europe and the US. For example, for the latter, Russia attempts to create a false narrative of Ukraine being an anti-Semitic Nazi state. But before diving deeper, let's look at a survey. Survey data of Russians in 2023. Nearly 30 million Russians harbour anti-Semitic attitudes, and this is a country of 140 million people, and 15%, and of course many of those will be children and people too old to get attitudinal ideas. So yeah, that's quite incredible. And 15% of those surveyed believe that Jews were responsible for most of the world's wars. 38% think that Jews have too much power in the business world. There were around 2 million Jews in the USSR. Approximately 880,000 of those were based in Russia. 500,000 Jews had left the country at the time, by the time of its collapse, and by 2021 there were just 83,000 Jews remaining in Russia. Interesting that Ukraine has a fascinating history with Judaism, embroiled in its own development. Not embroiled, that's probably the wrong word. That's infused throughout its own development. So if you some really good books. I'm going to do a video where I talk through the books I've read that I think are good recommendations to you. But The Gates of Europe gives you a good understanding, and that's Serhii Plokhy, who is all of his books on well, not all of his books. I've read his last couple of books on the history of Ukraine and then history of the war. Well worth reading. It gives you a good sense of the history of Ukraine, obviously, but also of how Jews have played a part in the history of Ukraine. In 2018, Russian Levada Center noted that Russian Jews believed open anti-Semitism was falling in the country, but that it was artificially suppressed by the senior leadership openly pursuing a more pro-Israel position. They also felt that anti-Semitism would become more open if Russia's senior leadership changed its public position on Israel. After the October 2023 Hamas terrorist attack, the Kremlin did exactly this. They labelled Israel and the US as an aggressor instead, even welcoming Hamas leaders to visit Moscow. After October 2023, Russia also had a surge in anti-Semitic attacks. For example, in October 2023, Russians attacked Jewish people at the Makhachkala airport. If you remember, I reported that to you at the time. It's pretty horrific. The pogrom was naturally later blamed on foreign actors, miscreants, and you guessed that right, Ukrainians. So these pogroms are these kind of riots, these movements against particularly Jewish people. All this didn't go unnoticed in Israel. If you remember this, I played this to you when it happened. Absolutely fascinating. This. It didn't go unnoticed in Israel. Prominent politician and Likud member Amir Weitman blamed Russia for supporting Hamas during an interview on RT. So this is Russia Today, the English version, stating that, quote, Russia will pay the price for supporting the enemies of Israel. Let's listen to him, because this is absolutely fascinating.
And if you are not able to understand that, and I get, with all due respect, that I understand you're under Russian payroll, and I understand this is a Russian propaganda, but you have to be very careful, because let me tell you, we're going to finish this war. We're going to win because we're stronger. After this, Russia will pay the price. Believe me, Russia will pay the price. Russia is supporting the enemies of Israel. Russia is supporting Nazi people who want to commit genocide on us, and just Russia will pay the price. Russia also. Now listen to me very carefully. We are going to finish with these Nazis. We're going to win this war. It's going to take the time it's going to take, but we're going to win this war. Afterwards, we're not forgetting what you are doing. We're not forgetting. We will come. We will make sure that Ukraine wins. We will make sure that you pay the price for what you have done. You as Russia, and you and as all the enemies of Israel, and you as all the people who are now making everything they can to support genocide of the Jews in Israel. We are not forgetting. We are not forgetting. Remember exactly what I'm saying now. You will pay the price.
Amir, I think it's safe to say that this is a very passionate conflict that is happening here.
Well, people have been massacred. My people has been slaughtered by your proxies, and you will pay the price. Is it clear? Believe me,
I don't actually think it is clear.
Very, very, very sternly.
So, despite what you think about the Israel-Hamas conflict, and I have a nuanced view on that, and I think, it's no surprise that one of the moderates has just stepped down from the war cabinet, Benny Gantz, who says, it's all going a bit too far, and etc., etc. However, when Hamas attacked and did those horrific things back on October the 7th, there was all this talk about how weaponry was coming from Russia, how a few of the recordings of some of those Hamas individuals, one of them, they used Russian words. The idea is it's clear they'd been trained by Russians as they were doing some kind of military thing. They were using these Russian terms. And so some Israelis, as you can see here, said, hang on a second, right, we're going to position ourselves against Russia now. And that would be useful for Ukraine, for sure, because there's an awful lot of weaponry that Israel have that could go to there for now obsolete, or not obsolete, for Patriot systems, PAC-2 Patriot systems that are now going to be sent to the scrap people, moved on. They could very well go to Ukraine, but Israel would be a really useful military supporter of Ukraine. It's a bit divisive if you're trying to court the global south, and I think this is why, even as a Jewish president, Zelensky has been, although he's said the right things with Israel, he hasn't been overtly supportive of Israel in a way that you might have expected, because the Israel-Hamas conflict has gone a bit sideways, and he knows that there will be people looking at him from the Middle East, from the global south, who aren't such fans of what Israel are doing, that he needs to keep on side, or if not on side, then at least neutral, rather than push them towards. If he gets too openly friendly with Israel, there'll be other nations who go, oh really? Well, then we're going to get friendly with Russia, because they feel that strongly. So I think Zelensky is walking a tightrope there, and I think he's done it really successfully, in all honesty. Because the most successful thing you can do in these situations is just not say stuff. Just whatever you say, you're going to get in trouble. So if you don't support Israel enough, you get in trouble with certain people in America and for the other supporters of Israel. And if you say things that do support Israel too much, then you're going to get in trouble with all sorts of other countries. So yeah. Anyway, at the same time, the Kremlin, says Kalyuniemi, the Kremlin is actively spreading age-old anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories of quote, Zionist globalist elites taking over the world. These tropes and stories, like the protocols of the elders of the Zion and Golden Billion, originate from Russia. And there you can see some of them. For those who are listening, as I'm speaking through these, reading out these tweets, I am providing some images alongside as supporting evidence from Kalyonyemi. After February 2022, Russia has tried to undermine Western aid to Ukraine by vilifying the Ukrainian leadership and especially Zelensky. Several high-ranking Russian officials have portrayed Zelensky as an inauthentic Jew, and the whole invasion was justified with the need to denazify Ukraine. So, of course, if they're going to denazify Ukraine, it makes it really difficult to sell that as an idea if the leader of Ukraine is in fact a Jew. So they have to call him like an inauthentic Jew and so on and so forth. Putin has called Zelensky a, quote, a disgrace to the Jewish people. Drunk Medvedev stated he had lost his Jewish identity. And when asked about Zelensky's Jewish identity, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, even stated that Hitler had Jewish blood too. I mean, ouch. Goodness me. Putin went as far as attempting to diminish the Nazi role in the murder of Jews in Ukraine during the Holocaust by claiming it was done by the Ukrainians and Banderites, and that, quote, even the SS troops didn't consider the mass killings possible. In Russia, the Zionists have been vilified by the genocidal Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. He's the kind of thinking behind a lot of what Putin does. That big essay from Putin back in, 2022? Was it 2020? Or whenever he wrote it before the war. It was very heavily influenced by Dugin, who claimed that the Crocus Hall attacks could have been Zionists' revenge for Russia's position on Gaza, while urging his followers to look for Mossad's fingerprints. It's amazing. Like, you've got ISIS, Islamic fundamentalists, going in, murdering 150 odd people. And then the first thing that Russia does is to blame. I mean, it's just laughable, isn't it? It's Ukraine what done it, right? That's for you, Bertold. It's Ukraine what done it. And then they say, it's the CIA what done it. And then they say, it's the Zionists what done it. What the Zionists actually did, an Islamic fundamental... Well, look, what is going on here is absolutely insane. So long before that, says Kalyonyemi, Russia's massive disinformation and hybrid operation machinery started spreading anti-Semitism online to sow unrest and polarize societies in the West. And we've seen this in the European elections. We see this in the US political landscape and in the run-up to the elections with added freneticism, if that's a word. For example, the FSB-controlled South Front, that's the name of it, South Front fake news blog has spread several anti-Semitic tropes, as you can see there. And in Europe, the Kremlin has complemented these narratives by conducting hybrid operations, such as the anti-Semitic graffiti campaign in France, further provoking online discussions on European anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not 100% sure that this was actually anti-Semitic. I'm not sure. So what happened? Okay, in the Hamas attacks on Israel, around about that time, shortly afterwards, so this is November, so this is 1 month, just almost exactly a month after the Hamas attacks, you had Stars of David being spray painted around Paris. Now, this was supposedly done by, I think, Moldovans who had came over under the one thinks the payment of Russians, so follow the money there, and you'd almost certainly get back to the Kremlin. They'd done this, but I don't know if it's anti-Semitic. It's just divisive, isn't it? It's like it might not be anti-Jewish there. It might be very pro-Jewish, but you've got to remember that these banlieues, these suburbs of Paris, in places, I don't know about this one or where they were, but there are large populations of Muslims due to the immigration that France has seen from North Africa when it was a colonial power in Africa. And this is partly what underwrites the rise of the National Rally in France, because there's this tension between indigenous French, as they would see it, the French population, and the Maghrébin, the North African immigrant, often Muslim people who are living and often then get ghettoized in certain areas, and the social cohesion is difficult. And so therefore putting Stars of David up on the walls is just going to rile someone. And this is what Russia does. It's not that it's ideologically anti-Semitic necessarily, although it might be that as well. There's a lot of rife ultra-nationalism in Russia, but it's like, what can we do that's the most divisive? What can we say that's just going to how can we stir the pot? How can we look at the hornet's nest that's buzzing away and just smack the crap out of it and then run away? And that's how they do it. And then recently they spray painted coffins and they placed those coffins. These were Bulgarians, I think this time, wasn't it? That were paid to go and do that. Similar kind of thing. As Kalyuniemi continues, so there might have been some more overt anti-Semitic stuff as well. Reports say investigators looking into the possibility that Russian security services ordered vandalism in Paris. That's red hand graffiti on, I presume, a list of Holocaust memorial. As we've seen, the conflict in the Middle East has polarized even the pro-Kremlin bloc, and this type of division is ideal for any kind of online propaganda disinformation campaign. Exactly kind of what I was saying, like you can go either way with this. You can just drop divisive bombs there down and just do a runner. Hit that hornet's nest and scarper. Now, it's worth mentioning that the conflict is very real and should be addressed, but the Kremlin is cynically using this dire situation to do what they do best, spreading false narratives and half-truths, thus dividing societies, but instead of focusing on foreign policy issues like the war in Ukraine, resort to infighting. And exactly right there. It's also worth mentioning that not everything comes from the Kremlin spin doctors. First of all, Iran and the CCP, so China, are also very active in spreading disinformation with their massive troll and bot farms. True. There are several players, and they all appear to be in that axis of evil. And even there's been talk, I don't know recently, but a couple of years back, talk about North Korean farms doing the same kind of stuff. So disinformation with their massive troll and bot farm. Second, many of these narratives are created by conspiracy theorists, which are then amplified. And this is something I talk to you so often about. It's not so much that the Russians are making up stuff out of whole cloth, but they take let's take the Israel-Hamas war. Like, it's not made up. It's a thing that exists, and each side has grievances, and in each country there are people who are very angry on either side of that divide. What you do is you amplify sometimes both sides. Just amplify both sides to make it an even bigger issue. That you think more people around you are angrier than they really are. This is the kind of Marjorie Taylor Greene effect, where Marjorie Taylor Greene is surrounded by so many bots and trolls who purport to be American, that she thinks all the people around her think just the same as her and are just as angry as her. And she's shouting about it. She's really angry. And then she goes to the polls. Luckily for her, she's in a massive pro-Republican area. So R plus 36 or whatever it is. So, I mean, she does have a lot of support, but you could get this situation where she thinks there are far more people that support her and some of her crazy views than there really are. Goes to the polls, and then not as many people vote for her, and she's been given that false sense of support. Well, it's the same here, where you get the sense that everyone's angry about the war in Israel. And actually, when you strip back that rhetoric, a great example is in the US, right? This is a really good example. I love it when ideas come just knit together. So in the US, when you look at polls about what is a concern for people, including polls explicitly for young people, right? You look at the media that is whipping up. You look at social media that's amplifying all this. All these people on these campuses around America that are pro-Hamas doing all these demonstrations. Oh my goodness, the young are really annoyed about Biden's position on the war in Israel. and then you actually do polling of these people as a larger cohort, not just looking at the very loud few people that are throwing chairs over there. When you look at the decent surveys, it comes 15th out of 16th of the list of things that people give a damn about. So in the run up to the election, where, for example, the Democrats might be thinking, right, do we really need to change our policy on Israel and Hamas, Israel-Palestine, given that there's all this loud noise here? Well, let's look at the data. No, actually, it appears that this is one of the things that people care the least about out of all the main things to care about. But we're led to believe that everyone's really angry about it, partly because of how mainstream media reports stuff, and partly because not on mainstream media, but on social media, the amplification of this discord is being felt. And partly that's going to be the natural algorithms of these social media platforms, but it's also going to be done on purpose by disinformation, by people involved in hybrid warfare, the Russians amplifying both sides. So hopefully that makes sense. So, to start the sentence again. Second, many of these narratives are created by conspiracy theorists, which are then amplified by the troll and bot farms. We should also consider that people have real concerns, for example, over inflation, identity politics, anti-Semitism, and immigration in both Europe and in the US, and that Russia uses them cynically to polarize societies. So it's not like any of these issues are not issues that don't exist. Like I have issues about identity politics. I was speaking to good friends of mine, both separately, actually, husband and wife. I spoke to them both separately, and they have the same opinions. Big fans of, say, Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, freedom of speech. Would have been like, when we were younger, they would have been like liberal like myself, but like move slightly on certain ideas, and then sit in this weird position where they've been sucked into the whole culture wars thing. And one of my arguments to them is, like, I'm not trying to say this isn't a thing, right? And that you are either right or wrong. I'm not actually interested in talking about like gender identity and trans issues. The argument I'm just about to make is not anything to do with yes or no, right or wrong, blah, blah, blah. My point is always, when we have these, and we've had these discussions in Tippling Philosophers meetings at the pub, is that you accord way more importance to these ideas than you really should. So if you're going into the voting booth in November 2024 or on July the 4th in the UK, and you're saying, I'm going to vote for these guys because of transgender toilets, right? Then you have been duped. And I've said this before. You've heard me say this before. I'm not saying it's not an issue, it's not worth debating, whatever. But if you're thinking that's more important than inflation, than employment, than what's happening with your healthcare system, then all of these really big ideas that require really critical policy to be made that will affect you in your daily life, right? Your welfare state. Now, that's not to take away from people who are struggling, who may be transgender and struggling with how society accepts them or doesn't, and their trials and tribulations. They will have their own challenges. I'm not belittling that. But in general society, like, how often have you had an issue with fricking transgender toilets? Like, in your life, how often has that been an issue in your day-to-day existence? And how long have you had to wait for a GP's appointment? And how much have you had to pay for your NHS dentist checkup? And how much and when and how? And your kids, have they got enough teachers? Is there enough money in your school system? Right? So if you're going to the voting booth and your head is packed full of culture wars shite, right? You have been duped. Now, again, I'm going to say it's not that these aren't problems that don't exist or that they aren't worth debating. But what I am saying is that if that's number one on your reasons to vote for one party over another party, you have been duped. Or you've just got your priorities wrong. Because these are and I often say that when a party is campaigning on that, it's because they don't have real substantive policy. It tells you something. If you are going into an election campaign with culture wars stuff at the top of your bill, then you are just empty of ideas. Or you're just super cynical because you know that does convince people, that people do go to the voting booth with these as number 1, 2, and 3. How much are we spending on defence? Well, that's a big thing because there's a frickin' war over there, right? And we need to be worried about that. Or if you're going to go saying woke this, woke that, blah blah blah. I listened to some Vox Pops the other day, and I'm like, why is it everyone, even in the UK now, this has taken on this term of woke from that we've got from the US and bastardise even that term, if you look at the history of the term. And they're saying, oh, woke this, woke that, and blah, 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 blah. And then you strip it down and you're like, what are you really worried about? You're just regurgitating social media crap. And it comes back to this, is that, yeah, these are real concerns. I'm not saying they don't exist. But they are being amplified, and you are being manipulated by the people who are amplifying that. And sometimes it's the algorithms, sometimes it's Russia or China or Iran. Just be warned. Loads of you are going to go have a go at me, I'm sure, for that, because these ideas still really infuriate you. But I will stand my ground and say they really shouldn't infuriate you. You might get really angry about them, but in reality, they have very little effect on your life. Very little effect. Right. I've spoken for quite a long time. So let's quickly run through this. So this is to do with the Georgia Dream sort of situation with regard to the protest against the foreign agents law that has been voted on and passed, vetoed and passed again. And you had the police turning up in huge numbers to fight against these massive crowds. And I was saying at the time, goodness me, this must be problematic. Georgia is a small country population-wise. What is it, 3 million people? 3 odd million people? And you're thinking, 3 million odd people. You're thinking a lot of these security services are going to know people that they're fighting against. How does that work? How does that work that you end up in such a small place? Like that's maybe just over the size of Birmingham. And if that many people in Birmingham in the UK came out and protested, and you got that many security services there, then you're beating up your own people. What's going on there? But of course, they also brought in these Titushkys that are kind of paid up thugs. And you wonder where some of these came from. And then when you heard some people shouting in Russian, you're like, have some of these people just been drafted in from Russia here? Anyway, I don't know what this thread is going to say, but that's what I talked about at the time. Anyway, Titushky, remember the term. The use of Titushkys in Georgia is proof that the Russians are orchestrating events. Literally not read this. It's straight out of the Putin's playbook. Bejina Ivanishvili, that I did a Vatnik soup on, he's the guy behind the Georgian Dream Party, is terrified. So Titushky 2.0 are being mobilized. Here's a thread on them. So, on top of the multifaceted election rigging involving the manipulation of almost every aspect of Georgian society, Georgia Dream's use of Titushkys represents the darker side of the operations. In reality, it shows they are scared, desperate, and weak. Where did they originate? During the Euromaidan protests, and by the way, if you want to watch an amazing documentary on that, as I've said before, go and watch Winter on Fire. It's free on YouTube, but also it's on Netflix. It's one of the greatest documentaries I've ever watched. They talk about Titushkys there. So where did it originate? During the Euromaidan protests in Ukraine in 2014, Titushkys played a crucial role in the government's efforts to suppress opposition and maintain President Viktor Yanukovych's power. These Titushkys, often young men from rural areas, were dressed in sportswear and posed as ordinary citizens, but their mission was to attack, threaten and provoke peaceful protesters. Despite using Titushkys to maintain power, Yanukovych's government failed to control the situation. The protests escalated and Yanukovych fled to Russia. Now, what the advantage is with these guys, I'm sure it's going to go on to talk about that, is you've got plausible deniability. So it's not, if you got caught on camera, like someone in a police uniform and riot gear kicking the absolute crap out of someone, then you've got a court case waiting to happen if things go down the kind of law and justice route, right? After the Ukrainian Revolution, Titushkys have been observed in other ex-Soviet countries, including Georgia. Georgian Dreamer Bizdina Ivanishvili used similar tactics to intimidate and provoke the opposition. In Georgia too, there have been numerous reports of thugs in unmarked black clothes, often bodybuilders with balaclavas, attacking and provoking peaceful demonstrators. These are Georgia's and Ivanishvili's Titushkys. The Titushkys in Georgia often blend in with the police, underlining who is really coordinating this and that they may operate with impunity. Titushkys are paid thugs, almost certainly funded by Bizdina Ivanishvili and protected by the Minister of Internal Affairs, Vakhtang Gamalari, who is also the head of the police. And who is Vakhtang Gamalari? Before taking office, he was the head of Ivanishvili's personal security detail, effectively serving as the oligarch's bodyguard. These Titushkys have access to enormous resources such as print shops, equipment to make stencils and tons of graffiti spray. It is no surprise that Bizdina Ivanishvili funds them and covers the costs. And then here's another referenced tweet. Huge resources have been spent on this poster campaign against these individuals. So Ivanishvili bringing out posters plastered around all over the shop, possibly by these Titushkys, not officially, of course. And it's plausible deniability. In recent days, Georgian Dream has continued to deploy Titushkys to beat opposition figures, harass and vandalise their homes and offices. They even admit it. So these pictures were not from Stone Age exhibit in a local museum. They're the tools and weapons used by dozens of Titushkys against our office last night to break the windows and threaten staff, said one opposition politician. Georgian Dream MP Dmitry Samkaradze is so terrified by the prospect of sanctions that he says if there will be, quote, discomfort for GD members, they will continue using Titushkys. Wow. And this is referring to a tweet from the 31st of May. The Georgian Dream MP Samkaradze or something stated that it is them behind the vandalisation of CSOs. Those are kind of NGOs or other organisations and party offices, and that more awaits anyone bringing any discomfort to any GD member. He then displayed a video showing the vandalisation of 13 CSOs and 9 opposition party offices. In other words, you've got a Georgian Dream politician openly saying, yeah, this is who we use, and any more of this stuff, you get more of it. My goodness. That's away from rule of law and towards authoritarian dictatorship, where you can do things with impunity. UNM party headquarters was vandalised. Look at the sheer amount. Titushky says this tweet. They also threw sticks and stones at the building. You can hear multiple warning shots into the air by the UNM guards, after which they flee. Just a number of them. And there was one where, I don't know if it was that party offices, but it's one they successfully did over, I think, and there was 100 of them. And that's a lot of people. A shop owner had a heated discussion with Georgian Dream Member of Parliament Viktor Japaridze one day, only to be severely beaten 2 days later when he was out with his kids and family. Absolutely shocking. And you look at that, you can guess who's a politician and who's a shopkeeper. And who's the one that would have got beaten up. So that's a real shame. As was reported about that, Justin Titushky's Georgian Dream propagandist media post TV journalist Natia Beridze and his cameraman attacked a Russian law protester and an already famous street shop owner near his house. A few days ago, Viktor Japaridze, a Georgian Dream MP, went to the street shop owner to apologise for taking his orange without paying and throwing it at the activist while the MP was angry. The owner opposes the government and he said to the MP, "What do you mean you apologise for an orange? Yesterday you took away my 4 children's future with your decision." And then, of course, he gets beaten up. and just more and more of this. Here's another one, another organised group of Georgian Dream Titushkys vandalising and putting up offensive posters promoting hate speech at the head offices of I presume, an opposition party in Georgia. And then more graffiti. In fact, I showed you some images of that very graffitied wall, I do believe. Another campaign against critical persons. There, more and more graffiti and pretty horrible stuff. The examples of Titushkys' actions during the Georgia Dream protests are also grotesque. And then reference to the many pieces of video of the Titushkys and the police generally beating the crap out of protesters. So Georgian Dream's methods firmly place them in a bygone century, and the values they reflect are distancing them from Europe and the Western world, which the people of Georgia long to be a part of. They rig elections, change laws to ensure continued rule, adapt tax laws to please their pro-Russian benefactor, Bidzina Ivanishvili. Increasingly, they use serious violence by their paid thugs, the Titushkys, to try to frighten and crush opposition. At the same time, they travel freely to Europe and the US, shop in Paris and London, and their kids get educated in Western universities. And this is that Georgian Dream politician who was seen in, was it a Paris airport, confronted and then given a load of crap by some Georgians who were dead against her. Bidzina Ivanishvili, MPs from Georgian Dream, ministers and their relatives need to feel the pressure. Sanction them now before it's too late, says this source. And actually, there is a growing move from the US to sanction Georgia. They have started sanctions on Georgia, and that is good news for trying to pull the country back to the Western sphere of influence. But of course, it's carrot or stick. You are going to have the challenge of trying to change the mind of the political elites in Georgia who have that power. And the problem is, the more you hit them with a stick, the more you drive them away. So sanctions and whatnot, you drive them away and into the Russian sphere of influence. And so should it be a case of trying to attract them through bribery, or is it a little bit of both? I don't know. But anyway, interesting stuff there. Anyway, now on to my kind of sidebar on American politics. As I say, tangentially connected to Ukraine, but giving you a bit of an update on just a few ideas surrounding that, a bit of an update on things that are going on. Hopefully it's of some interest. I mean, that's a pretty grand claim, but there you go. If you want to pause and read the very small print there, you can do so. Right, moving on. This is so the American food giant ADM that had ties with Russian companies that were stealing grain from Ukraine, and also Chinese ties with Chinese companies involved in similar stuff. It lied about its major stake in two factories in Xinjiang, a Chinese region notorious for state-imposed forced labor. I believe that things might be happening about this. In a document posted to the sustainability section of its website earlier this year, the company claimed there were, quote, no identifiable direct or indirect connection between ADM and the region, but the facilities are owned by a subsidiary of Wilmar International, a Singapore-based conglomerate whose largest single shareholder is ADM. ADM has a seat on Wilmar's board and says it has a significant influence on the company. And this is what happens is you get these entities that are owned by other entities, that are owned by other entities, and there's so much murkiness, there's such a lack of clarity in the financial world. I mean, it's really interesting. I was listening to a political discussion earlier where you have take for example, I think it was what's his name, Armando Iannucci was saying this, that there is a culture of blaming people on benefits and benefits fraud, and everyone talks about, oh, you're on benefits, and there's fraud, and so there's so much, but we need to stop benefits going to poor people because all this benefits fraud. And like, no one says anything about business fraud, which is 10 times worse, and literally 10 times, over 10 times more significant than benefits fraud. So we concentrate on all this stuff and not on this stuff. And where are the policies about business fraud? And of course, trying to sort out business fraud is so difficult because it is so murky and trying to follow these routes. But then when you're cutting IRS, or in UK it'll be civil servants, we're gonna slash civil servants, we're gonna slash the IRS, so we can't follow tax evaders, and it just blows my mind. Anyway, one of the two facilities is also co-owned by the British food processing and retail company Associated British Foods. The maker of Fleischmann's yeast and other well-known products. That's not well known in our country, but nonetheless, our analysis based on satellite imagery, corporate data, company disclosures, and government documents shows that ADM and Wilmar's facilities in Xinjiang have significantly increased their footprint since the government's systemic abuses in the region intensified in 2017. So on and so forth. I mean, it goes on. Lots of analysis done by OSINT Technical that look to show that ADM, looking at light pollution data and activities at different sites, that shows that ADM appear to be doing some fairly shady business deals, certainly surrounding the stolen grain from Ukraine, so they could end up being increasingly being in trouble. Now, hydrocarbons. Okay, let's look at this. This is Jake Bro, and Jake Bro, but he is a veteran, but his YouTube channel, I think, was doing stuff to do with these kind of business deals and commodities, and I don't know. Anyway, he says it turns out that President Biden has crazy good swing trading skills. Biden sold almost 300 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in 2022 at around $100 to $120, and is now buying it back with prices around $80 a barrel today. Now, this is interesting. What happened is when the war started, and there were all these issues with energy. There's an energy crisis and inflation underwritten by energy spiraling upwards. And then there were supply and demand issues to do with hydrocarbons, especially with Russia providing a lot and then not wanting to buy from Russia. And what OPEC did was try and cut production to keep those prices artificially up, or just keep those prices up. Biden, so it seems really weird that Trump, for example, has been saying, we're going to drill, baby, drill, when the US has been both drilling at record rates. They've been producing more oil than has ever been produced in the history of the world by any country, right? So the whole idea of drill, baby, drill is just doesn't make sense, but it's a soundbite that lands. But actually the facts will tell you that Biden, despite his environmental promises and whatnot, was absolutely drilling and also releasing strategic reserves to try and flood the market to keep prices down, because inflation, he didn't want inflation to ruin the economy in the US. And obviously people blame the government when inflation is high, even though it's often to do with many things that the government can't control. Well, this is something he could control, but he's actually, I don't know whether this was originally intended. I mean, when you sell it, I suppose if you get rid of your strategic reserves, you're always presuming you're going to refill your strategic reserves. And so you're always thinking you're going to go buy it back at a lower price than you're selling it for. And goodness me, he's made an absolute ton of money, it seems. So selling at $120 and then buying it back 2 years later at $80 has netted billions in profits for the US government. My speculation why Biden is doing this now and not after the election is because with inflation back under 3%, his economic advisors are telling him that the Federal Reserve is close to cutting interest rates again. Cutting rates will probably accelerate demand for oil again. So as people are spending more, they're not saving, interest rates come down, you spend more, which means generally oil goes up because more products are being used, you're doing more traveling, the more products are being bought and therefore manufactured. So you have a demand for that energy. So they will raise again in the near future. So buy it in now. So anyway, that's pretty clever stuff. Now, talking about inflation, and this is where I'm going to do just a little bit of US politics here. And I know it's not 100% to do with the Ukraine war, but it will define who gets elected in November 2024, which I think has a huge impact on Ukraine. And I would advocate that Biden is the best option as opposed to Trump. So we're just going to pop in to look at a bit of inflation and some of the pressures that might be on the American economy in light of stuff like we've just seen, but then on the flip side, in light of Trump winning the election.
Yes. So last time Trump was president, his economic agenda consisted almost entirely of a corporate tax cut and tariffs. And it looks like he's planning to double down on both of those in a second term. Washington Post reported on Monday that he actually wants to give corporations and rich people yet another tax cut if he wins. The New York Times also had a report over the weekend about how he was planning to cut taxes on corporations, raise taxes on anything you buy that's made abroad. That's the universal across-the-board tariff that he wants to do, and deport millions of undocumented immigrants. All will likely increase prices and make inflation much worse. How do you think Democrats should push back on this? Like, do you lose people as soon as you start talking about economic policy and get into the weeds? On the other hand, like every poll I've ever seen, tax cuts for the rich are the most unpopular policy or one of the most unpopular policies. And that's sort of where Democrats traditionally have Republicans on the ropes.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know what you think about this. I absolutely believe that these policy ideas would be inflationary. I am skeptical about our ability to explain it to voters in a concise way, especially when you get into the specifics of some of the policies, because part of the argument is about Trump's immigration policies, which is an area where Joe Biden starts way, way, way underwater as compared to Trump. Another piece is tariffs on Chinese imports or Chinese goods that come to the country. And again, it seems like voters like policies that are harsh on China. Now, you're right that Trump has also proposed just an across-the-board tariff on all imports. But I agree. I think the lowest hanging fruit here is the Republican plan to give more tax cuts to the richest people in the country and to corporations. There was some recent Pew polling that found 60% of voters say they are bothered a lot by the feeling that rich people and corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes.
It's worth reminding you, if you weren't aware, that in 2017, those tax cuts were responsible for adding $4 trillion to the debt, and they were incredibly unpopular. They were very controversial. They were very popular to the people that Trump hangs around with, of course, but yeah, they didn't exactly raise money and do what he claimed they would do.
I think those people are right to be pissed. And the Republican plan would also explode the debt. I think it's $4.6 trillion over a decade, just if you extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts. But Trump and his buddies in Congress apparently want to go further than just the 2016 or 2017 tax cut.
Yeah, I think it can be a very powerful, compelling story, but you've got to tell the story and you've got to include sort of motivation in it instead of just talking about the policy. And, Trump basically passed one major piece of legislation in 4 years in the White House. And it was a tax cut for the rich that cost $4 trillion and that he wants to extend. So it costs $4 trillion over the next 10 years. And then he wants to add another $1 trillion to it, right? So he wants to spend $5 trillion in a tax cut that goes mainly to the rich. He wants you to pay for it because it's adding to the deficit and he's not paying for it. And he didn't pay for the last one. That's all he did last time. Did he pass anything to help workers? No. And so,
by the way, he could have done this tipped wage proposal last time too. He just
didn't want to do it, right? Because he's bullshit. And now he is meeting with campaign donors and telling them, like rich billionaires, and saying, hey, vote for me and I'll get you another tax cut. He's meeting with oil companies and being like, hey, vote for me and I'll make sure that you get more subsidies as well.
And I'll cut regulations.
And I'll cut regulations for you. So that's what Trump's out there doing. And I think Joe Biden, this is a good one for the debate. Donald Trump keeps attacking Joe Biden about inflation. It's like, what are you going to do for inflation? How does giving a huge tax cut to rich people, how does that help inflation? How does that help people with their costs?
Right.
I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, right? Like Joe Biden wants the rich to pay more in taxes so he can cut the deficit and give everyone else a break. I just think it's tricky because it doesn't get covered as much as the more identity-inflected cultural issues that we talk about, these economic issues, because it's not 2012 anymore,
right.
Last time we ran this campaign. But again, I think you can tell a story that paints Trump as just there to take care of himself and his rich friends and not you. And I think that works on a more emotional level than just the policy.
Yeah,
and so on and so forth. You get the point. So it's looking like the economy is going to be playing a major part, but it might get trumped by, for want of a better word, by culture wars things. But the reality is, what's a policy? What policy are each of these candidates going to run on? Because one doesn't appear to be running on any policy at all. Now, what might be affecting the election as well? Trump's obviously had his conviction. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, has just been found guilty of having a firearm and then lying with background checks or whatever, lying on by point of fact that he was addicted to drugs at the time he got the gun. He's got this long-running addiction issue. Joe Biden, though, very interestingly, he said, I won't pardon him. Completely unlike Trump, said, I won't pardon him if he gets done by the system. That's the system working. Whereas Trump came out of his saying, this is a two-tier system. It's completely unfair. It's done me, even though he was given more leeway than any other criminal, or he wasn't at the time, any other suspected felon in his position. He came out of the courts and every day and gave an announcement to the press. Like, it was just bending over backwards to accommodate him. And then he comes out and says it's a two-tier system. And then, by the way, you know, he supposedly has a gun himself and as a convicted felon, etc., etc. So you got to watch out. Now, the question is, will it harm Joe Biden? Depends what news agency you are. You know, Daily Mail said, can Joe Biden survive after Hunter Biden's guilty verdict blow? And then other people saying he is right not to pardon him, and other people saying it's going to make not the blindest bit of difference. Now, interestingly, last night, and I'm getting to the end here. So last night in Ohio, there was a special election, in an election that the guy who had previously been running and that had resigned, I think, had given up, but he had been winning by 30 points plus. I think 36 points even at some point. But anyway, the Democrats ran against the Republican there, and the Republican won by 10 points. And this represents a 20-point shift towards Democrats in a special election in Ohio. So when you have polls, and interestingly, the 538 poll has now got Joe Biden up at I think it's at 52 to 48 percent chance of winning, which is the first time that's shifted. You've got special election after special election. Actually, a number of these are shown. So New York, we've had, a 17-point swing. We've had a 10-point swing, and it's a 20-point swing towards Democrats, which is overperforming the polls. So if this is a reflection of where the polls might be not quite correct, and the polls are starting to swing already to Joe Biden, then actually there is potentially a very significant chance, which is exactly what I've been saying for a long time, that Joe Biden is probably going to win the election. Right. And really, it should be a shoo-in, because when we go back to things like inflation and the economy, the American economy is absolutely flying compared to all its, all the other G7 economies. The UK economy today has been accused of flatlining again. Right. Completely not what the US economy is doing. So anyway, there's my US, just give you a little bit of an update where I think things are at. And I think you will start to see, it might come down to the performance in the debates, but the debates have been arranged to the benefit of Joe Biden by the point of fact that you are going to get cut off if you speak too long. That there's no audience, so you can't like play to an audience and have all these like rounds of applause that are really partisan, so on and so forth. It's actually exactly the kind of debate you want if you want a sensible debate and not some kind of public showing. But yeah, be interesting to see who comes out top and then. But yeah, there's a long time still before November, but it looks like some of the winds are changing, which is exactly what I would have expected. Right, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.